In this video, I want to go ahead and cover HTML forms. And basically what HTML forms are, they're different HTML elements that we'll use to capture data from our end users. So I have an HTML page already set up here, and I'm going to go ahead and use my HTML template that I would use for any other HTML page. So I'm just going to start typing. Here's my HTML template. We're going to title this forms, and I'm going to go ahead and save this as index.html on my desktop in my directory structure that I have set up. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as index.html. And the idea with this page is I want to capture some user information. I want to capture user entered values, like for instance if they would enter their name, their email address, their phone number, maybe they select a city, a state, various information that might be relevant to capture for an end user. So in order to do that, this isn't entirely necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and put a form tag in the body. Whenever I'm using forms, I'm typically going to have a form tag. It's not entirely necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and put it there anyway. And then you'll notice that I used the autocomplete feature, and it gave me a couple of options. So it said, would you like to style it using a CSS class? I'm going to get rid of that. But the action and method I'm going to go ahead and leave there, and I want to use that, but I want to use it kind of later later in the sequence here. So I want to come back to these two attributes that are here with the form. Okay, so for now I'm just kind of ignoring them, but I want to come back to what they actually mean here in a little bit. So first of all, I want to go ahead and capture the user's name. So I want them to enter their name. I'm going to prompt them to enter their name. In order to do that, I'm just going to have a text box that they can fill in. They can type in their name. In order to do that, I'm going to use an input tag. So input type equal to text is going to allow me to enter text into a text field. Okay, so I have this input type equal to text. It's inside of a form. I'm going to go ahead and bring it up in my live server. And then we should be able to view that text box. I can enter my name. Okay, so I have a text box there, and you'll notice that this doesn't really look very nice. And the reason it doesn't look very nice is because I'm not giving the user any information about this text field saying, hey, this is where your name should go. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a label. So I'm just going to have a label here, and I'm going to autocomplete that. It says I have a label for, and what the label for is really these labels are going to be linked to input fields. So this is a label for the person's name. And then this text is what will be displayed to the user. Okay, so if I jump back over to the browser, you'll see now I have this label. The text inside of the label tags, the beginning and ending tags, is what gets rendered. It's for a field called name. So the idea here is that this input tag will have a name equal to name. And the for attribute, what it does is if I would click on the label, so let's say I was in a mobile browser and I touch my finger on the name label, it'll automatically position the cursor inside this text box, this input field, type equal to text. Okay, so that for attribute would then position the cursor inside of this input field, and they have to match, so the name and the name. Okay, so this grouping goes together. So I have a label and a text box. Those two things are kind of one field. Let's say I wanted to go ahead and ask the user to select which state they're from. Okay, so I might use input field on my form to capture text information. So you enter your city, you enter your address, you enter your name, your email. I'd use input type equal to text. For a state, I might want them to choose from a list of options. Okay, so if we're just talking about Midwest states, maybe I want Minnesota and Wisconsin and Illinois and things like that. So I want the user to choose their state, so I'm going to have a label for the state field. And then instead of an input field, type equal to text, a drop-down list is going to be created by using select tags. So here's my beginning and ending select tag. And again, that select tag needs to have a name. I have my label that's for the field called state. So there we are set up. In order to provide the user with some choices, there are options in HTML syntax. So I'm going to have an option. And my option, I won't worry about attributes right now. So I'm going to have a few options. And like I said, I want Midwest states. So I'm going to go with Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin. So those are my Midwest states. Okay, and what that's going to do is going to create a label and then a drop-down list. So I enter my name, and then I choose which state I'm from. And you'll notice that these things are in line. Okay, so there's no block elements there, so I don't word wrap or return to the next line. However, I might want to do that. I might want to have a vertically oriented form as opposed to a horizontally oriented form. And then the way I would do that is I might use a section for these things. So I could say that this first thing is a section. So the name is a section, and then the state would be another section. And I'm grabbing both the label and the select tag. And because I have them in sections, and the section's a block element, now you can see that they're vertically arranged as opposed to horizontally arranged. Okay, so we have a field where the user can enter text. We have a field where the user can choose from a drop-down list. I want to look at radio buttons and checkboxes as well. So let's go ahead and deal with radio buttons and checkboxes. So with radio buttons, the idea is that these options are mutually exclusive. So for instance, if I was talking about a high school student and I wanted to know what grade they were in, they could either be freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So they'd have to make a selection there, but they couldn't be more than one. So I'm going to go ahead and have a section, and then I'm going to have a label for the grade level. And then I want to give some options. Okay, so I'm going to have a couple of different options, and the options I'm going to have are going to be input fields. So I'm going to have an input type equal to radio. And then I really need that for freshman. And then same thing for sophomore, junior, and senior. So let's go ahead and fix this. And you'll see what it looks like there. So right now I have my radio buttons. It looks like radio buttons. And you'll notice that I can check all of them, and I can't uncheck them. And that's because they're radio buttons. What I really want, though, is I want them to be mutually exclusive, meaning if I select freshman, I couldn't select sophomore or junior or senior, and vice versa. Like if I select junior, none of the other options would be available to me. And the way radio buttons are supposed to work is if I select one, it then subsequently deselects the others. Okay, and that's not happening right now. So it doesn't happen by default. The only way it happens is if I actually give these fields a name. So my name is going to be grade level. And then I'm going to use that same name for all of the different radio buttons. So they're all grade levels. So now you'll notice because they have the same name, now these radio buttons are mutually exclusive to one another. So if I select sophomore, then I can't be a junior, senior, or freshman, but if I select senior, then it'll deselect the sophomore value. Okay, so a radio button, these are mutually exclusive. They have to be one and only one option for those radio buttons. Okay, so that's radio buttons. Checkboxes are a little bit different, so I have another section, and let's say I wanted you to choose your favorite colors. And I'm being specific in that I want you to choose more than one color. Okay, so it's not your favorite color. If it was just your favorite color, I'd want you to choose one and only one, and at that point I would use radio buttons. But in this case I'm saying, yeah, go ahead and choose how many ever colors you like. Doesn't matter to me. Choose your favorite colors. Okay, so then my input type is going to be a little bit different here. So I'm going to have an input type equal to checkbox. And then I'm going to have a color associated with that, so red, and I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this, green, blue, and yellow. And the idea here is that I want the user to be able to choose multiple options. So they're a senior in high school now, they can say, I have 2 favorite colors. Or they can say, no, I don't really have a favorite color. Or maybe I have one and only one, or maybe I have 2 different ones. Whatever I want to choose for my favorite color, I have the option to choose 0 to many when I'm using checkboxes. Okay, so checkboxes there would indicate that I can choose any of the options. Okay. After choosing my favorite colors and choosing my grade level, I might want to have like some additional comments. So I'm going to go ahead and have another section. I'm going to have a label for my comments. So here's my comments. And then in order for a user to have comments, typically what we're going to use is a text area. And you'll see it's giving me 8 rows and 8 columns, and my name right now is name, but I want to make the name comments. Okay, and the idea there is that I have this 8 rows, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and E. So 8 rows, 80 characters in each row, and then because I'm using Chrome, I have this ability to expand this. And you'll notice the alignment looks maybe a little bit funny. I can change the alignment of my comments label, so I might want to change the vertical alignment to be top or centered or bottom. So by default it'll be bottom. Right now I'm not necessarily worried about that. I want to focus on the form itself as opposed to worrying about the alignment of my comments. But this text area field allows me to do multiple lines of text for multiple rows. Okay, so it's basically I want to have free-form text entry, then I'm going to use a text area field as opposed to a text input field. Okay, so we have a text input field, But then if I want multi-lines, then I'm going to use a text area field to do that. Okay, so now we're finally getting to the point where all of this is going to come together. And if you remember back to the beginning, I said, we have this form, and the form has this action and method. And I want to come back to these attributes and what they actually mean. Okay, so what they mean, the first one, let's talk about the action. So the action indicates that if I have a form and I send the data somewhere, so the user is going to fill out my form, right? So they enter their name, the state, what grade they're in, what their favorite colors are, and then any additional comments. They fill all that stuff out. If they were to send it somewhere, so they want to send it, and the way they send it is with a submit button, and we'll figure that out here in a second. Where would I be sending it to? And that's defined in this action attribute. Okay, so this action attribute basically says, okay, I have a form, I have all of these details that the user's filled out, where should I send that data? Like where should their name go? Where should the state go? What grade level they're in? What's their favorite colors? What are their comments? So that's what the action attribute is there for. So I'm going to go ahead and have a submit button. And there's two ways I can have a submit button. And for now, I'm just going to show you one way because I don't think it's worth, the discussion on it. So I'm going to have an input type equal to submit with a value, and the value attribute is going to be the text that should show up on the button. Send data to the action attribute value. So this will be a very large button because we have lots of text in it, but you'll see this button. And then the other attribute that we were talking about with our form is this method attribute. So post is the default method when we used our HTML template for a form. I'm going to go ahead and change that because it's easier to visualize what's going on here. So I'm changing the method from post to get. And those are really the only two methods that we're going to deal with in this class. So my method can either be a post or it can be a get. I'm changing it to a get because it's visually easy to see. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. I enter a name, so Brian from Iowa, sophomore, favorite color is green, and HTML forms are cool. Okay, so I'm going to send the data to my action attribute. So if I look back over at my action attribute, I want to send the data to index.html. So basically what's happening is I'm going to fill out the form and I'm going to send the data back to this exact same page. Okay, so right now I'm on index.html. When I send the data, I'm going to send it to index.html. So you'll notice I'm on index.html. But then you'll also notice that all of the data that I had in the form, so name equal to Brian, state Iowa, grade level on, comments, HTML forms are cool with plus signs in between. Okay, so we lost some data. So we have some data, but we also lost some data. If you look, we have the name, we have the state, grade level equal to on. That's not great. That doesn't tell me whether it's freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, so that's not all that helpful. I don't have any information about which colors were selected, but then I have comments. Okay, so I'm getting some of the data, but not all of the data. And the reason for that is because if I look at my checkboxes, so color was one of the fields that didn't come through. The reason color is not coming through is because I don't have a name attribute associated with that form element. If there's no name attribute associated with the form element, that data does not get sent when I click on the submit. So the submit is what triggers the form data to get sent. It gets sent to whatever the action attribute indicates. That's the location it's getting sent to. And then the method is the mechanism which we use to send the data. So if I go back over to the browser, this data shows up in the URL because it was sent there. And the reason it shows up in the URL is because I said that that form data should get sent via an HTTP GET. So that's why the form data shows up in the URL. Okay, so you'll notice we're missing the color. We're missing the color because we never said that the color has a name. So any of the colors, they don't have names, so that data doesn't get sent. Okay. Likewise, if we go back over to the browser, the grade level just says on. It doesn't tell us which grade level. It doesn't say freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. The reason why is because our radio buttons don't have values. So if I go ahead and say we're going to have a value for freshman equal to 9, and then 10 for sophomore, and 11 for junior, and 12 for senior. Okay, so now I have grade level values. Okay, so I refresh this, Brian, Iowa, sophomore, red, and some dummy comments. Now you'll notice that the grade level shows up as 10. I still don't have values for my favorite colors, so let's fix that next. Okay, so my favorite colors, I'm going to have a value equal to red. And then I'll copy and paste that syntax for each of the other colors. Excuse me. Red, green, blue, and yellow. Okay, so I have all those colors now. So again, Brian, Iowa, junior, and my favorite colors are going to be green and blue. Okay, so I'm a junior, green and blue are my favorite colors, and now you'll notice that when I send this, I still don't have my colors. Why do I not have my colors? I put values there for each of the colors, but I didn't put names for each of the colors. And because I don't have a name, then it's still not going to get sent over. So name's going to be red, name's going to be green, and the value attribute is great that I put it in there, but I think the reality is that the name is more important than the value, and I say that because if I don't have a value, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. And the reason why is because the name's going to indicate whether it's on or off. So you'll notice I do Brian, junior, green and blue, and some dummy comments. And now you'll notice what ends up happening is I get green equal to green, blue equal to blue. And the reason I'm getting green equals green is because the equal sign, the thing that I have highlighted, shows up because of the value. So if I left off the values, so let's say I leave off the values here for green and blue, not that that's a bad thing that there's a value, it doesn't hurt anything, but if I leave off the values and I choose those as my favorite colors again, so Brian, junior, favorite colors green and blue with some dummy comments, what you'll see is that green shows up as on, blue shows up as on, and then because I didn't select yellow or red, that's not showing up. Okay, so up here in the address bar is where those values end up getting sent. Alternatively, we could have had our method, instead of being a get, it could be a post. And when we make our method a post, that changes things quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the HTML page. And now, since we're sending all of our data via a post, so we fill this out, we send it again, you'll notice that I'm getting an error, and really it's not a problem to send it via a post. It's just not going to show up in the address bar. So I send all the same form data, but I send it via an HTTP post. And what that means is I basically embedded in my HTTP headers as form data, so that when I get to index.html, I have the data available to me if it was sent to me, and I could read the data, but it's really hard to visually see that. And that's why I said, to start with, I think it makes more sense to send the data via an HTTP GET. Okay? The problem with sending the data via an HTTP GET, so you'll see it works. So it works fine. We can see all that embedded data, and it works fine. Is sometimes we can have sensitive information there. So for instance, maybe I want to ask for the name and for a password. Okay, so I'm going to prompt the user for a password. So input name equal to password. And then instead of type equal to text, I'm going to change the type to password. And the only difference between those two fields, so name is still text, password when I start typing, you'll notice is bulleted out because the type's equal to password. Okay. So I have that password field, and when I have the password field, what ends up happening is you'll notice that the password gets embedded in the URL now. And that can be problematic. I probably shouldn't have passwords showing up in my address bar in plain text. Okay, so if I have sensitive information, I really don't want to send that sensitive information via an HTTP GET. Okay? Instead, I would rather send that information not via a GET, but via a post. Okay, and then there's other considerations with GETs and posts. So a GET is typically used when I want to move to a new page and I'm just reading data. So I'm not changing anything on the server. I'm just saying, hey, you should go over to this new URL. A post would be a situation where I want to change something on the server. So the user fills out a form, and maybe I'm creating a new account. So when I create a new account, I'm actually going to update something on the server. I'm going to have a new record in my database saying, hey, this person wants a new account, create a new record of that account. If I'm going to actually change the server state, then that method that I'm using should be a HTTP post. Okay, so we're going to use different methods depending on the context of our form. Okay, so right now, for this week, what I really want to focus on is forms are going to be used all over the place. We should know what the action attribute is and what the method attribute is. We should know how these attributes come into play when the user actually submits our form data using a submit button. So when I submit my form data, then I send that form data to my action attribute, and I send it via either a post or a GET. And then really for this week, what I want to do is I want to focus on just a few different types of form elements. So these are really the most common form elements that you're going to run into. So we're going to have an input type equal to text for them to enter freeform text. We're going to have an input type equal to password, so they can enter a password where the characters that they enter would be starred out. We can have drop-down lists with a select tag and various options. We can have radio buttons, we can have checkboxes, we can have multi-line text area fields. And then lastly, I would suggest that this button, the button itself, our submit button, is a type of form element. It's a common form element. So really just the different common form elements for this screencast.